versus blue-white control. Grace down a game.
I believe Tannon lost round 1 here, playing a slightly different list here. 2 main deck copies of Aetherling.
Ooh, interesting.
Not something you see a lot of. Junk mid-range winning game 1 in this matchup, not the easiest thing to do.
Not at all. And Grace here going to start with the Temple of Enlightenment. We'll take a look at the sideboards here in just a moment, but as you mentioned, Grace having 2 copies of Aetherling. Of course, I look to see if there's Planar Cleansing. The answer is no. 4 copies of Attention Sphere, but oddly enough, 4 copies of Quicken.
Yeah, we talked about this. You want to be a little bit faster. Tannon's only playing 26 lands as a result because he's anticipating just casting Quicken on turn 1 pretty often.
He also has just 1 Elspeth as well, so a different take, but all the blue-white decks nowadays just look different. Not a ton. The game plan's, of course, still the same, but there are definitely some changes going on recently in blue-white.
Oh, there's so many different ways to build the deck. It's really compelling. It feels like so much of it is priced in, but there's even cards like Negates and Essence Scatters. We saw Joe Lisette play main deck and Null. I mean, there's a lot of room to play different stuff. A lot of the cards you're priced into playing because they're so powerful, Sphinx of Revelation, Jace, and so forth, but...
Of course, our Crewfix looks like it's going to resolve, so the top card here is going to be a copy of Elspeth there for Cernoch. And Grace can record that information. You saw him not have any interest in countering this. But we will take a look at his sideboard very quickly. You'll find 2 copies of Gainsay, a Negate, 2 Dispel, 2 Last Breath, a Fated Retribution, a Blind Obedience, 4 copies of Fiendslayer Paladin, and 2 copies of Celestial Flare. We've talked about it quite a bit this weekend. People do not have interest in losing to Boss Sly.
No, although I think, unless he wants it for other cards, I think that Ratchet Bomb is the better card against Tom's deck because it's a little bit faster and not nearly as susceptible to pump spells. But Fiendslayer Paladin is still an excellent addition for that matchup.
Grace just playing a land and passing the turn back over to Cernoch. The ability to take an Overgrown Tomb from the top of his deck and put it in play if he'd like. That's a pretty good place to start, so that's what's going to happen. It'll come into play tap. Cernoch's going to go up to 17. His life total not mattering a ton in this matchup. He just wants to exert a lot of pressure.
Yeah, and that Courser surviving into the next turn was a really big deal because Jacob was at risk of missing his land drop here, and his hand is all 4 or 5 mana stuff. Or at least all of his proactive actions.
Yeah, his proactive action is expensive, and his reactive stuff actually is looking pretty poor right now. He has 2 copies of Hero's Downfall and 2 copies of Abrupt Decay in the hand. Now, yes, Grace does have the Tension Spheres in his deck, but he doesn't have them right now, and I wouldn't be surprised if he boarded them out.
Correct. Although Jacob does have a lot of Planeswalkers, so maybe he still wants his Spheres, but the point is taken. It's possible they're not even in his deck anymore.
Copy of Banishing at the top card here. And Grace going to record that information, make sure he knows exactly what's in the opponent's hand. Cernoch will gain a life from the forest. Looks like Grace may be setting up the old Quicken into Supreme Verdict. He's willing to take all of this damage, so he'll go a little bit lower. And now it's time for a Quicken into what looks to be a Supreme Verdict, perhaps, and it will be.
And critically, Tannon has found a Sphinx's Revelation here as well. So he's going to be able to untap with multiple counterspells from this spot, and then if Jacob doesn't do anything threatening, be able to take over the game of Revelation.
Oh, I thought that maybe Grace sideboarded out the Tension Sphere, but he draws a copy for the turn. So that is a card that's not going to be great in this matchup. He already knows about a Banishing Light. You have to imagine, again, that your opponent does have Abrupt Decay.
Yeah. And Jacob's hand's so susceptible to these counterspells. I mean, it's all reactive stuff, and any of the proactive stuff that he has involves his entire turn. You see this Dissolve is just so bad for Jacob in this spot.
Yeah, a whole turn wasted, countering the spell, allowing Grace to scry. He puts the top card to the bottom, draws a copy of Quicken. He still has to Dissolve here, but he's just going to pass the turn back over to Cernoch. We'll take a draw. See if he can add anything threatening to the table here. This will be 3 mana. That's a Sin Collector. And now Grace has to think about things. This is the perfect card here for Cernoch to be able to actually, force some action.
Yeah.
And it looks like Grace says, all right, I'm going to Revelation for 3. Here's a bunch of cards. You see 2 Dissolves, a Detention Sphere, a Quicken. Make that 2 Detention Spheres, and then 2 copies of Hallowed Fountain. I would have liked, if I was Grace there, probably main phasing the Sphinx's Revelation, simply because, maybe hitting a land drop may be important. I do understand wanting to leave up a counterspell, though.
Yeah, I think, right now, if he taps out on his own turn and something like Obsessed resolves, he's in a ton of trouble. So even though it's a little awkward, I think I like this sequencing. And if I'm in Jacob's spot here, I'm just taking these Dissolves. All of his powerful stuff is 5 and 6 mana. It's on his main phase. They're just really hard for him to beat. He's got to start working those over. Dissolve is what Cernoch does take with that Sin Collector.
You see Grace's life total a little bit lower, so you're going to have to speed things up here if you're Tannon.
Sin Collector just so good against blue-white control.
Great in this matchup. So very good. Hollow Fountain going to come into play tap. Grace going to attack here. Grace going to be attacked, excuse me, by Cernoch and his Sin Collector. Going to play Temple of Malady, take a look at the top card, leave it on top very quickly, but as you mentioned, Cernoch just has a lot of reactive cards in his hand.
I think Tannon can sense it too. We know he's not flooding out because he's been stalled on lands here. And if he had threats, he'd probably be casting them. So reasonable to assume that Jacob has a lot of Abrupt Decay, Hero's Downfall, Golgari Charm, etc. type cards in his hand.
Looks like Tannon's going to cast a Quicken here. Looks like he picked up a copy of Divination.
And that's great because I don't think he wanted to Supreme Verdict in this spot. I thought it was possible, but Quicken into Divination is exactly what Tannon's in the market for.
That's a beautiful turn.
Yeah.
Now he's going to untap all these lands. Time to take a draw. It's a copy of Azorius Guildgate. So he's got a couple of lands here. We know about the Hollow Fountain, a couple of basics in Island and Plains. Some nice options available.
Yeah, that Divination was just a great pickup there.
The big problem here, of course, is that those Attention Spheres that he has, those aren't so good.
He doesn't really want to cast on these Sin Collectors when he knows there's a really good chance it's just going to get blown up and re-trigger the Sin Collector.
Speaking of Sin Collector, another one is the draw step here for Cernoch, and that's a good way, again, to start the action. And you see Grace probably doesn't want to have to counter this card, but he's basically being left with no choice almost.
I think a counter is good here. And scrying is valuable anyway. You definitely can't Detention Sphere these things.
Yeah. This feels like a reluctant dissolve, but it will be dissolved nonetheless. So that'll take care of Sin Collector. It's time to scry. Grace can leave that top card on top. I believe it's a Divination.
I think it was Aetherling got left on top.
That one's good too.
Aetherling's really good at pacing a game here where Jacob's trying to, like, shuck and jive and set up the spot. Aetherling might just blow that all up.
Beautiful's going to trade there with the Sin Collector. Cernoch is just going to have to pass the turn back. Grace does draw a card. I believe it may have been an Aetherling, and if that's the case, you got to imagine he's going to deploy that threat, because that's one's going to be real tough to kill, and it closes the game out very fast.
Yeah, and Tannon with a very decisive point there, your turn, knows that this is big trouble for Jacob.
You see Cernoch curious in the 5 abilities of the card. Excuse me, the 4. I often think of 5 because of Morphling, but only 4 here.
But there are plenty. I mean, it doesn't need to be.
I think 4 is enough.
Yeah.
So Aetherling, the ultimate win condition for these Sphinx's Revelation decks, has shown up, even though some players have decided to go without it. Reed Duke, the notable name, but it just depends on who you are and what you like, I think.
Very good at stealing control matchups, that's for sure.
Looks like Cernoch is drawing a copy of a Johnny Mentor of Pride, and that's a card that can get him back in this game. So here is the Planeswalker. That's going to come in. This elevator's going up, so it's time to take a look at a couple cards, see what we can add to the hand. You saw it, Obzad and Underworld Connections among the cards that Cernoch is looking at. However, he's under the gun now, doesn't have really time to mess around.
Yeah, that's a tough thing about playing against blue-white control here. You try to play this game plan of getting in your spots, dealing damage where you can, and just sort of out-grinding them, breaking up their hand, and then Aetherling or something along those lines can just make it all for naught. Revelation plays that role a lot of the time as well.
Yep. But Aetherling is kind of the ultimate at doing that, and it's certainly doing it in this particular game. You see a Johnny just resolve, find a card, that's it. Supreme Verdict to draw here for Grace, but now Grace has the option to either take down the Mentor, it looks like he's going to do, or just go straight ahead. And actually, I kind of like how the math adds up here. You get 2 across the Mutavault, makes it 2 8-point swings now with Aetherling to get the job done.
Yeah, easy.
Yeah. Hollow Fountain going to come and play tap, simply pass the turn back. Will Grace over to Cernoch, who will take a draw. Cernoch's going to have a tough time getting into this one. He's got a lot of nice cards in his hand, copies of Hero's Downfall, Vanishing Light. The power level of his hand is very high. A lot of those cards don't have text at this point.
Well, Jacob still might be able to race here. If he's able to resolve Obsidat, he can use his Hero's Downfalls just as Fogs. It's not pretty, but he might be able to stay in this game. Tannon's hand is just not very good against the card upsets. A land, 2 copies of Supreme Verdict, and 2 copies of Detention Sphere. So this card gives him a shot.
Well, passing the turn back. Atheling number 2 shows up to the party. Not sure how much that changes things. Certainly makes things a little more interesting, I suppose.
It makes Jacob's hero's downfall to buy time plan way worse.
Yeah. So there's a pump. Those are pumps as well. There's a downfall to buy time. And the way that goes. Grace, I can't imagine there's any interest in adding anything to the table with the Atheling shields down. So Atheling will just simply come back and we'll play this turn basically over again. Cernoch draws a card, copy of Abrupt Decay. A lot of those. You have to imagine if you're Grace and your opponent's not playing anything, what could they be holding?
Yeah, just removal spells.
Yeah, just removal spells. Abrupt Decay is, I mean, a lot of cards that are difficult to cast. And all Cernoch can do is just pass the turn back over to Grace yet again. Grace playing a Temple of Enlightenment. Going to put the top card somewhere. It looks like, yeah, it's going to go towards the bottom. And if I'm Tannon, I don't really change my behavior.
No,
Nothing's changed, right?
Last turn was fine. You got a hero's downfall out of his hand, and Jacob didn't follow up with anything, so just do that.
Looks like it'll be Mutavault this time. Added to the party. And it looks like Cernoch's going to say no blocks, of course, and we'll see if Grace has any interest in pumps this go around.
He may just say no pumps, play my second Atheling with 2 blue up.
Looks like he's going to go reaching, so that's pump 1. That's pump 2. He's happy with that amount of damage. That'll be 9. Excuse me, that'll be 8 that does come across, but blink we go. So 2 will come across. Cernoch's going to go down to 14. So Mutavault now chipping away. But this is not a game that Cernoch can win if he keeps doing this.
Not like this, yeah.
Cernoch going to simply pass the turn back, and this style of game, is, as we said, is not one that favors him. He can have a hero's downfall for every turn of the game and would still lose.
And I think we're probably going to see the second Atheling get deployed here.
I think it's about that time. There's Mutavault, 4, 5, and 6. And with 3 blue mana available, even if one of them dies, you're still feeling just fine about things.
It's one of those spots where, you know, you want to err on the side of caution because you just want to err on the side of caution. But there's realistically very little your opponent can do to get out of this spot.
Yeah, this is a pretty hard lock. And Cernoch's going to draw Mana Confluence and then pick things up. So Tannon Grace is going to win game number 2 here over Jacob Cernoch. Blue-white control evens things up against Chunk midrange.
You got to wonder, Tannon just did such a great job there playing against those detention spheres there. Didn't really do anything with them, knowing that Jacob probably had Abrupt Decay in his hand. And I'm curious to see right now if Jacob wants to reevaluate how many of these Abrupt Decays he wants in his deck at all, because Tannon did a great job of invalidating those cards.
We will turn our attentions to the sideboards here in just a moment, but a lot of people are excited about these modern Premier IQs that we're doing here, beginning in in July. I keep saying September. It's in July. It's sooner than I think in Baltimore.
Yeah, it's going to be part of the Open Series. Starting in Baltimore, as you mentioned, $5,000 in cash prize, open points to all participants. Top 4 receive invites to the Invitational, additional side events as well. We wanted to add modern support that didn't come at the expense of the Standard or Legacy Opens. It's here now. We've rejiggered the tournament a little bit. The elimination rounds of the Tanner Open are going to be played entirely on Sunday, so only the Swiss rounds on Saturday. 9 a.m. is going to be our Legacy Open. Same as it always is, going to be on camera the entire time, same as always. But we're going to have the Modern Premier IQ starting 10 a.m. every Sunday, starting with the Baltimore Open.
And we can't forget that we've already got stores running these tournaments as well. Even though they will be at the Open Series, stores can run these things too.
Correct, and if you're a TO or a store owner looking to get these into your area, you can contact SCG Games through all the usual channels you do for your organized play. You can see a couple stores here in Tampa, Tacoma, Knoxville, Denver, and Roseville already have this up and running for a little bit of time here in August, September, and October, November as well. So stores already have this up and running. And we're really excited to be bringing this level of IQ to the local level and have real modern support at our Opens.
Our organized play department, they do listen to the players. They wanted modern, and we had to figure out a way to do it, and we finally have. So if you'd like a modern Premier IQ at your store, it's not hard to do so. Just go through the same means that you do for any IQ.
Yeah, exactly. The same organized play channels you do for anything else you do through Star City Games also work for the Premier IQs.
Players beginning game number 3 here in just a moment. One thing we have not done actually is go over Cernoch's sideboard. What does he have available?
2 Thoughtseize, 2 Arbor Colossus, 2 Dark Betrayal, 2 Fiendslayer Paladin, 2 Blood Baron, 2 Doomblade, 2 Sin Collector, and an Ultimate Price. Not a ton to bring in this matchup. The 2 Blood Barons can catch blue-white control off guard. The 2 Sin Collectors and the Thoughtseizes are, of course, his best cards, but not a lot. Now, Jacob's list is a little bit better against control decks game 1 than you traditionally see junk mid-range decks be. There's 0 copies of Doomblade or Ultimate Price. The removal spells are Abrupt Decay, Hero's Downfall, and Banishing Light. Now 10 removal spells is a lot, but at least they all have some amount of utility against most builds of blue-white control, as opposed to the build we saw earlier on camera with his main deck, Doomblades and Ultimate Prices, really don't help against blue-white control.
See, Grace is going to take a mulligan here. Cernoch happy with his 7. He'll be on the play. Seems like a tough matchup for blue-white control, even though Grace was able to win game number 2.
Yeah, no, it's... well, I don't know. I mean, it's... Jacob still has a lot of the junk mid-range problem of the things that he ultimately needs to resolve to win the game are 5 or 6 mana, and they're on his own main phase. So counter spells are very good against him. And because he has Quick and Supreme Verdict, he has an answer to Obsidian that a lot of builds of blue-white control do not have.
This is true. 4 quickens feels like a lot, though.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's definitely a lot, but you know he wants to be doing something early and often, and Quick and Supreme Verdict is very powerful against a number of decks.
Well, Grace gonna shuffle up here, get ready for game number 3. Here between blue-white control and junk mid-range. A lot more junk mid-range. This is the 2nd or 3rd time we've had it on camera than I expected this weekend.
Yeah, and a deck that can easily adapt to beat a deck like Tom's.
Yeah. Grace going to send this back again, so he's going down to find. You saw his hand with just 2 planes, a Detention Sphere as well, and Sphere is virtually mulligan in this matchup. I can't imagine one of those lasting very long at all.
You can see he was loath to cast it game 2.
Yeah.
You know, he was doing everything in his power to not cast it because Jacob clearly had multiple ways to remove it lingering in his hand.
Yeah. Well, we'll see if Grace can find anything useful here. In game number 3 on a mulligan of 5. Not a great spot to be, especially against a high-powered deck like junk mid-range. Got to have everything lined up appropriately now.
Counter spells are still very good for Tannon. The 2 copies of Divination he has in his list are very important. And he does have a lot of cantrips. 4 copies of Azorius Charm, the 4 Quickens you alluded to. So if he can get to his, you know, if he can get to Jace and start drawing cards, he can power through this mulligan. It's asking a lot, but his deck is better suited to do it than most builds of blue-white control.
Yeah, we've seen stranger things happen, that's for sure. Not impossible, but it will be difficult.
That's a pretty aggressive 6-card mulligan there from 10. I think most players in the room would have kept that hand. I think it's correct for the reason that you mentioned. The Detention Sphere is just pretty bad against Jacob, but I think a lot of people would have been hard-pressed to throw that hand back.
Well, we'll see if Grace can find a good 5. Time to take a look. Ugh. No, not the best. You see a Quicken, a Azorius Charm. He's going to have to run off a blue. Well, that's a start.
Now his hand's totally fine. I mean,
it's completely functional.
He's got a Quicken and an Azorius Charm to help find his land drops.
Now, Cernoch is off to a slow start. I mean, you expect him to be, truth be told, but the spells that he casts will be huge haymakers. But Grace can actually play the game now, and that's all you can really ask for in a mulligan of 5.
Uh-oh.
Oh, no, oh, no. Oh, boy. Cernoch missing a 3rd land drop here. So Grace going to cycle Azorius Charm. He's found 2 more lands. He's going to maybe play that Hallfound untapped, and he will to represent Dissolve. So
yeah, he pumped big there for a moment, but the 2 life doesn't matter that much against a deck like Jacob.
Not at all.
Just take it.
And countering something is much more relevant. There's a Godless Shrine that's going to come off the top. So 1 good land drop does deserve another, but it's just going to come into play tapped. So Grace will take a draw here. Let's see. I believe another copy of Dissolve. So quite a few counter spells. You mentioned these are the important cards to have.
With the Revelation too, he's got the resources he needs to dig out of this. Those Dissolves are going to find him his land drops if Jacob does anything, and then that Rev catches him right back up in terms of card count.
So Cernoch has anything to cast, just has to pass the turn back yet again. Time to discard a Hero's Downfall. Grace going to draw another copy of Sphinx's Revelation. We might see him fire off 1 for 1 now.
With 2 Dissolves in hand, I still might wait. I mean, he's not at any risk of discarding yet.
I just, he wants to find a land at this point. He's got the backup Revelation. I can understand why he'd want to do this for 1. Looks like he did find land. I think another copy of Sphinx's Revelation, too. So, you see an Aetherling there as well. So, actually a pretty good hand. Things are actually really breaking Grace's way this game.
Yeah, Jacob kept a risky one and has not panned out.
And all Cernoch can do is pass the turnbacks. Now this is a rev for 2. This one I don't love as much.
Well, Tannon has Aetherling in hand, so he's got a different game plan now.
Yeah, things have changed.
Just turbo out Aetherling.
Temple of Enlightenment. Gonna put the top card to the bottom. And all of a sudden, Grace, playing blue-white control, and mulligan to 5, has 7 cards in his hand. There's a Courser of Krufix. Grace says that's gonna get dissolved. So take a look at the top card. That top card's gonna go to him as well. I think if you're Grace, you're just looking for lands, since you can play Aetherling with some safety. I would feel the most comfortable with Aetherling if I have 2 lands.
Well, I think, you know, if Tannon had drawn a land this turn, I think he would have fired it off.
Okay.
Until then, he's going to wait for a spot for Jacob to tap out. Tannon either wants to have 2 mana to protect it if Jacob has mana up, or 1 mana if Jacob taps out.
Okay.
It's unrealistic that Jacob can chain together 2 removal spells while he's tapped out, like going into his own turn.
Jace archetype of thought, the draw here for Grace. A little bit risky, simply because, you know, now he's looking for another blue mana to be able to represent a counter spell, but he is going to go with it. So I'm going to take it down, and he does find a blue land in Temple of Enlightenment, but it does come into play tapped. So Dissolve is off the table for right now.
But Jacob can't do too much threatening from this spot unless he rips a white source of mana and casts Obsidian. That's the one thing.
And actually, then Grace has a Syncopate at the ready in his hand, too, in case that is the case in this situation. So I think that Grace may have everything all covered.
Yeah, if Tannon has a Syncopate, then it's all covered.
Well, top card here for Grace. He's considering his options, as he's just working his way towards another Aetherling win, if he can get there. May have to discard a card here. So many cards in his hand for a player mulligan to 5. Detention Sphere may be the easiest one to discard.
Seems like Tannon's valued these cards very low correctly in the post-board games, just because Jacob has so many ways to destroy them. So
Cernoch going to draw a card. There's your Godless Shrine. That's going to come into play untapped. We mentioned that this could be kind of the backbreaking card. Is a copy of Obsidian. He's going to go with an Archangel Thune.
That ain't it.
That is not Obsidian, my friend.
That is not Obsidian.
I'm not sure if Grace has a Syncopate, but not going to counter it if he does. So Sphinx's Revelation, the draw here for Grace. Going to play a copy of Mutavault. You see the Jason play. The lands here as well, reorganizing those. Maybe with some interest in casting a Supreme Verdict, maybe an Aetherling. We'll see.
Aetherling I don't like deploying because Archangel can race it. So I'd rather have the board stable, at least in terms of life gain or Jacob's ability to race before deploying the Aetherling.
Jace's going to tick up after that Supreme Verdict, so Archangel's going to trade 1 for 1 with the Mass Removal spell. But Grace just keeping his life total high and keeping the board clear, so when Aetherling does hit the table, it'll be a pretty easy win from there.
You can tell he's got a game plan. I
Yeah.
mean, he definitely knows how he wants to approach this matchup post-board.
There's Negate to take care of a Johnny. Finding a use for that counterspell. Quite a few targets, however, after sideboard.
I think Negate's quite underplayed, especially against these decks that are almost all their threatening action is Planeswalkers.
I'm inclined to agree. This is elevators going up on Jace. And it might be about that time for Mr. Langan to come to play.
Yep. Triple blue / dissolve backup. If Jacob taps out for something threatening, it can just be dissolved. If he does nothing of consequence, Tannon just untaps.
And Cernoch immediately under the gun. And this is why I like Aetherling in these decks. Some people consider it to be a crush, but I like the ability just to get the games over with.
Well, you know, you don't want to be playing these games against a deck like Junk Midrange that's trying to, you know, thought seize you and duress you and synclocker you and try to push through these slower sort of value threats. Just shut the door. I mean, Jacob's going to die with cards in his hand, most likely. And that's because of the way the Tannon set up this matchup post-board.
And now Cernoch, and all he can do is pass the turn back here in the face of Aetherling. Grace going to draw a card. It's a copy of Supreme Verdict. Jace is going to take down, so a couple cards coming. And an island, a divination, and a plains. You have to imagine Div's going to go by itself. It'll be 2 cards either way, though, for Grace.
I like taking the lands here because his mana is going to be tied up with Aetherling most likely. So
Yeah, I feel the same way.
no reason to take the divination. The cards he needs to win the game are already on the table.
See Grace pull planes back. Maybe that'll be for a Mutavault activation. it looks like it'll be for 2 Mutavault activations potentially, or just the one. This will be an attack here for 6. Feels a lot like game 2. An Advent of the Worm will be cast. We'll see if Grace has any interest in countering this. And the answer is yes. So Dissolve will take care of the 5/5 Flash Worm. And Grace is going to put the top card to the bottom with the Scribe.
Yeah, that feels easily worth a counterspell in that spot.
Grace a little bit of pumping here with Aetherling. See if there will be any more. It's just going to be an attack here for 7. Cernoch's going to go down to 9. And Grace looks like very cautiously passing the turn back. Yep, and that's exactly what he's going to do. Maybe, deciding if he's supposed to blink or not. But Aetherling being tapped or untapped doesn't actually matter in this situation.
I think Tannon's totally happy here. He has Dissolve plus a blue mana left over. So Aetherling's completely protected and representing lethal next turn.
A very favorable mulligan here for Grace.
Well, to Tannon's credit, the way his deck is built is definitely more inclined to come back from mulligans to 5 than most builds. Instead of having spells in his hand, he had Azorius Charm and Quicken, was able to churn over the cards and eventually get into this spot.
Fire at Mutavaults, just 1, singular. And Grace is going to show a couple copies of Dissolve, and that is going to do it. Tannon Grace is going to win this match over Jacob Cernoch. 2 games to 1, blue-white control, and a mulligan of 5 game 3, still able to get the job.